Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at Saturday's presidential elections in Afghanistan, first round. We're talking about the beginning of the end of the post-Karzai, of Hamid Karzai era after 12 years, and also the drawdown as well of U.S.-led NATO forces. With us, Afghanistan's ambassador to France, Assad OMER. Welcome back as well to Ghalib IQBAL, Pakistan's ambassador to France. She was the New York Times bureau chief in Kabul, now in Paris. Glad to have you back. Alissa, Johannsen, RUBIN, and our correspondent Vikram SINGH, who is just back from Kabul. He joins us from Delhi. Just before the break, Ambassador IQBAL, you were telling us how there has to be talk with the Taliban. There's also been the pondering of an offensive by the Pakistani government against the Taliban. And it can be a little confusing because we're talking about that area, right, that's on the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Right now, where are things going?
At the moment, we are negotiating. At the moment, there is a ceasefire. And there is nothing going on from both sides. We had isolated incidents in Pakistan, a few attacks here and there, and we lost a few lives also over there. But the government is determined to give peace a chance. They want to negotiate because the ultimate alternate we have is, of course, the use of force. But at the moment, I think it's a very wise decision by the government of Pakistan, by the people of Pakistan, to engage all those who were inciting violence in the country. And it's important that they understand and accept and recognize the Constitution of Pakistan and act in accordance with the Constitution of Pakistan. And that is the whole purpose of the negotiations with Taliban.
All right. Our friend Sarah asking, will the Taliban accept election outcome, and will it change anything for Afghanistan's women? Ambassador?
Actually, yes, in the sense that we say that all presidential candidates, they had one, for them is very important. There is a what we call red line as a woman's right. That's they put on the top of the program, and that's very important. That whatever peace process negotiation will be, that we will keep this our what we call acquired rights, we can say, through our constitutions. That's we have to keep, and all presidential candidates agreed upon, and that's something very important for them. Yes.
Alissa, have women's rights plateaued in Afghanistan, or are they still on the rise?
Well, I think it depends where. There's a great difference between the experience of women in cities, and particularly in Kabul and Herat, and to some extent Mazar-e-Sharif, and which are the sort of three very large cities. Then, in contrast to women in rural areas, women in rural areas, I think, have seen much less than women in cities in terms of protection from violence, domestic violence primarily, but also in terms of their ability to access schools and jobs. There are schools, but they tend to be only in the population centers, district centers. So if you're from a family that farms, or a family that's at all up in the mountains in a village, your chances are much smaller unless you have an exceptionally progressive family that's going to take you to school. It's difficult for women to travel alone in those places. It's certainly almost impossible for them to work outside the home. And
you heard Ambassador IQBAL saying that right now they're in a negotiating mode, Islamabad is, with the Taliban. What effect does that have? Does it have any effect on what the Taliban inside of Afghanistan do? Well,
I think, it's very difficult to know exactly where the Pakistani Taliban leave off and the Afghan Taliban begin, because the area that they're in, Waziristan, is the border between the Pakistani side and the Afghan side is very permeable. And at times the Pakistanis have certainly complained that Afghanistan is sheltering Pakistani Taliban, and certainly Afghans have complained that Pakistan is sheltering some of the Afghan Taliban, and then they come over the border and make attacks. So I think negotiation is all depends on what a deal looks like. And the question has always been whether the Taliban, who have been very clear that they do not want a democracy, would actually come out and accept the kinds of rights for women that are being talked about by all the candidates. So from what you're saying,
they have a lot at stake in, excuse me for saying it this way, messing up this this election.
Yes, but they don't. They do. I think it would be not easy for them to back down. For all of them, I think some of them, it's not a uniform group. There are differing factions within the Taliban as well. So, but I think the leadership has never really been willing to back away from the original tenets.
Vikram Singh, at the outset of our show, you described the enthusiasm that you witnessed traveling across Afghanistan the last few weeks. What about the Taliban? Would you say that their influence is waxing or waning?
I mean, the Taliban are still extremely important, and there's no denying that they do have an influence, that they definitely do affect politics and life in Afghanistan, and that's been the case for many years, and the last few weeks with these attacks, of course, they're very much in the public conscience. Amongst the people that I spoke to over the past few weeks were some Taliban, ex-Taliban ministers, ex-members of the Taliban government. And as Alissa pointed out, it's not a unified group. So there are different positions within that group. But on the whole, they are not enthusiastic about democracy, to put it lightly. They're very strongly opposed to women's rights. And that's going to be one of the major issues for whoever wins this election, really, is dealing with that group and their demands, because a lot of the things that they see as a prerequisite for these negotiations to be successful would take away some of the major achievements of the last decade.
And let me ask you, Vikram, you have, as we mentioned, Western-educated candidates that are front-runners, like reformer Ashraf Ghani, but then you see he too has with him warlords on the ticket, including, in his case, his running mate, Abdul Rashid Dostum. What does that say for the kind of leader the next president of Afghanistan will be?
I think it just reflects the reality of Afghan politics at this moment. There was talk a decade ago of removing these warlords from power, of a clean break from the years where these warlords ruled Afghanistan, in a sense, ruled pockets. But of course, that's not happened, and it's not going to happen anytime soon. And I think the presence of Mr. Dostum on Ashraf Ghani's ticket is just a reflection, really, of the political reality where these warlords are still very important, very significant, and they have tremendous amounts of influence. So to wish them away from Afghan public life is just not going to happen.
And Vikram, we talked a little bit about the disparity between what you witnessed and the coverage here in the west of Afghanistan's election campaign. What about where you are right now in New Delhi? What eye do Indians and does the Indian government have on this election?
Well, Afghanistan is hugely important for India, and I think that's underlined by the fact that the biggest ever aid package that India has given to any country is the one that it just announced for Afghanistan, $2 billion. It's building roads, it's building schools, it's building infrastructure, and symbolically very important, it's also building the new Afghan parliament. So Indians, of course, see this as a very important election. I think they do have a preference for some of the candidates, but whoever comes to power, India will be very keen to engage with them. And it'll be interesting to see, because, of course, there's elections in India as well. It'll be interesting to see what the new Indian government's approach will be to the new Afghan government. A lot of people predicting that the right-wing BJP will come to power here, which could see a more muscular approach to regional politics. And it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out with two new governments in both countries.
More muscular, what do you mean?
Well, of course, regional politics, for India, of course, are defined by the presence of Pakistan as well. And just to give you an example, India has contributed a lot in terms of aid to Afghanistan, but despite President Karzai is asking for it, they've not contributed militarily, really. And there are some analysts here who believe that if the BJP government were to come in power, maybe India might be ready to engage with Afghanistan on that level. And that would be hugely significant in this year with NATO pulling out. So it could see a certain realignment in the Indian and Afghan relationship, which will have bearings on the entire region, of course.
Ambassador Iqbal, after the Soviets left Afghanistan, there was a bit of a proxy war between India and Pakistan inside of Afghanistan. With the Americans drawing down, NATO drawing down, if the BJP comes to power in India, are we going to see a rerun of the same?
It's not the question of rerun what Pakistan wishes to see and how Pakistan is going to react to a certain situation. I think it's important for the world, as I said earlier, to remain engaged with Afghanistan in all fields, specifically in the economic fields. If we have reconstruction in Afghanistan, if we have economic benefits coming out for the Afghan people, it's going to be good. And there should be no vacuum at all, as I said earlier also. Now,
are you apprehensive at the prospect of a Modi victory in that regard?
I wouldn't be able to comment on the results of an election because any government which comes into power either in New Delhi or in Kabul, Pakistan is going to interact with those governments because that is the policy of our government to improve our relations with the neighbors, improve our relations with the neighboring countries and with the regional countries. So that is not the question who comes into power. The question is that whosoever comes into power, how we interact with them. And responding to your earlier question, we feel that the business of Afghanistan should be conducted by the Afghans themselves. And it should not have the interference of any regional country at all. The friendly relationship between any two countries, we have no problems with that. But relationship which are based on activities against a third country, definitely we would not support that.
Ambassador OMER, how much do India's elections matter to Afghanistan?
Well, as I said, India, we have excellent relationship with India, with all our neighbors, including India. And that we say that our relationship with is bipartisan, we should say. That would be Congress Party or BJP. We don't see really any difference. We will have a good relationship. But I would like to add that because we are looking towards next election, all these candidates, they had on their agenda, one item, which is relationship with our neighbors. Each one really reiterated that they don't want the Afghan territory to be used against our neighbors. That's really one of the constant in our policy. So whatever.
Do you remember those times after the pullout of the Soviets?
Yes, exactly. But so we don't want to go in that time, in that period. And if we have this BCA, means a bilateral security agreement with the United States, that's not against our neighbors. The same thing, we have a good relationship with India. It's not against Pakistan. Or same thing, if we have a good relationship with Pakistan, we should not be determined to another country. So that's we are very firm on it, and all the candidates with the first, next election they affirm that.
All right, but when India gives you a record amount of aid, when it, for instance, it's building power lines to the north.
Yes.
That road that can take you down to the port cities in Iran rather than go through the Khyber Pass into Pakistan. That's not just philanthropy, is it?
No, that's a relationship. It was because we like to ourselves diversify our transit routes. We have excellent route to Afghanistan.
But you know when they're doing it, they have an eye on Pakistan.
Pakistan, Iran, and also from Central Asia. We have a third one through Turkmenistan. So we like to, as a normal, that diversify our choice in transit.
Alissa, how do you see this going forth?
In terms of relations with the neighbors?
Yeah.
Well, one has to remember history a little bit here, and Afghanistan has always been a contested area for all of the neighbors. Whether, if one goes back, there was a period when it was absorbed into Persia, which is now Iran. Parts of it have been part of Pakistan, of sort of the greater British Empire, when that included India and Pakistan, as well as parts of Afghanistan. We remember the long period of the 19th century when the British attempted to control Afghanistan. It didn't work very well for them. And I think Afghanistan has always had this tense relationship with its neighbors in which it both wants good relations, as the ambassador said, but also is very wary of too much influence. And so those two competing feelings are in constant tension. And you will hear, if you're talking to people in Kandahar, you will hear that Iran is way too influential in Mazar-e-Sharif. If you're in Mazar-e-Sharif, you will hear that Pakistan is determining what's going on in Kandahar and Zabul province, that there's really hardly an Afghan there. It goes, and while there are elements of truth in all these, the Afghans in the end have really resisted very much foreign domination for a long time. And it's something that I think the neighbors are very aware of, and so they each attempt to insinuate themselves as much as possible to gain as much ability to influence.
In an election of Narendra Modi, the BJP leader in India, would that have an impact on Afghanistan?
Well, I think the point that Vikram raised is the right one. I think a lot depends on whether or not military aid were to come to Afghanistan. I think if India gives military aid, that would make Pakistan very uncomfortable, and they would perhaps need to match that or feel that there was something dangerous in that. And the same thing if Iran were to contribute. I mean, the neighbors are not at ease with each other.
When you left Kabul after an assignment, that you were there for how many years was it?
I was for 4 years, and then I was there another couple of years for a different, not for the New York Times. But.
So you were there in some total 6 years. When you leave after the end of those 6 years, did you have the sense that this place is going somewhere, or this place is going down the tubes?
I don't think things happen quickly in Afghanistan, and I've learned not to predict too much, because whenever you think something's about to go really wrong or about to go really right, it doesn't quite happen. So I think one has to think of it over a much longer time period.
Because I know when we speak here to, for instance, military people from the French army,
right,
there's a bit of a sense of they've left with their tail between their legs.
Well, the Taliban remain a powerful force despite an enormous effort by the West to try to weaken them, and they remain very influential in fairly large swaths of the country, in rural areas, not so much in cities. And what I was going to say is that I think what is an irreversible change is the number of people living in cities. And cities generally are places where people are exposed to a larger world. And so I think that's a very positive development, although the infrastructure isn't in place to take care of people in cities terribly well. But nonetheless, that's a very positive thing. But in the rest of the country, I'm concerned really for people's ability to make choices about their life. And I think in areas where the Taliban dominates, or where warlords dominate, it doesn't have to be Taliban. It can be, it's very hard because their lives are set for them.
It's been said often in the past that you leave Kabul and people's allegiances to what happens in the capital is at best tenuous. Do you have a sense that is changing?
You mean, yes. I think the Kabul, as you rightly said, if we compare Kabul with, for example, the last election, 2009, despite we had few terrorist attacks, but still is much more peaceful. Really, and we have, particularly now, we have our own security forces. I mean, that is not negligible. This campaign election is really under control of the Afghan forces, and we had really 60,000 extra troops are deployed in all area, and that is a very good thing. The strength of the army, police, national army, and then the Afghan forces. We cannot compare forces now and when we see 5 years back. There's a big difference.
There's this tinge of skepticism here from Bilal, who says, Minister of Interior says security forces are ready for any kind of post-election scenario. I think he's a bit ironic. He says that's a bit assuaging. there is the criticism that the Afghan army, for all the training it's had, is not combat ready.
Well, how should we okay, maybe on the Air Force, we are a little bit weak, but that LUB is underway. But otherwise, they are in charge, and 93% of the operation is Afghan forces were taking care of Afghanistan.
Vikram, when you travel from place to place, what's it like?
I mean, I think as Alissa pointed out earlier, that traveling between cities and between two rural areas of Afghanistan has always been dangerous, and that has not improved significantly over the last few years. But it must be remembered that the Afghan armed forces are operating in extremely difficult conditions, and in many cases, they don't even have proper equipment really to fight the sort of battles that they're fighting. So security, of course, remains a huge challenge. This past week has been a reminder that it is an issue even in urban centers. I was at the Ministry of Interior for a number of meetings last week, and officials there kept on telling me that they were afraid that there would be an attack. So they were aware that there would be an attack, and yet they could do little to prevent the bombing that took place a couple of days ago, that took place yesterday, in fact. That being said, the Afghan armed forces definitely, as the ambassador pointed out, they have improved a lot over the last 5 years, and definitely the sense that the country will fall apart in case there is some sort of mixed result or something like that. I don't think that sense is widely shared in Afghanistan.
And the point that Alissa made about people moving to cities, that the country is changing, how fast is that change coming?
Well, it is happening at a very fast pace. I mean, whether it's happening fast enough and whether the Afghan cities have the infrastructure to support all those new people coming in is another point altogether. What's definitely happening is that it is leading to, as Alissa said, a change in mindsets. There's a massive gulf, really, between what you see in cities like Kabul and Herat and Mazar and the countryside. So the real challenge, I guess, for the new government in Afghanistan will be to transfer some of the gains that have been made in Afghan cities to the countryside. But it is going to be a formidable task.
When you look at the indicators on Afghanistan, the World Bank says, by the way, that the economy is going to contract over the coming year. Are we definitely going to be in for a lot of instability after this election?
I would not say that. I think a lot of factors would determine the stability of Afghanistan in the post-election era. And the economy playing the most important part, and then the other political forces within the country and within the region which are going to play an important part over there. Economy, like we are hosting over 3 million refugees from Afghanistan. And these 3 million people are engaged in very constructive economic activity within our country. Once you have peace over there and these people move back to Afghanistan, that is going to bring about a positive change. That is going to bring about a positive change not only for these people but also for their country. And when you look at Afghanistan, I think looking at Afghanistan with pessimism is not the answer. Looking at Afghanistan with a hope and with a determination that we are going to remain engaged as an international community and we are going to help them wherever they have any weakness, that is the answer to the problem in Afghanistan. And we all should make sure that we are there for them, for our friends, for our brothers over there in Afghanistan, so that the Afghan people, they are able to determine their own future. They need to determine their destiny. We are only there to provide them this extra support as family.
All right, first round of the election on Saturday. There'll be a second round?
We don't know really. It's very difficult to say now.
Difficult to say.
Really.
Okay.
We'll see how will happen.
Ambassador OMER, I want to thank you. Ambassador IQBAL as well. Alissa, Johannsen, RUBIN, and Vikram Singh for joining us from New Delhi. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Welcome to Reporters.
On April the 6th, 1994, Rwandan President Juvenal Habyarimana's plane was shot down by a missile. Within a day, the country was consumed by a murderous wave of violence. Millions were forced to flee, the country was reduced to ruins, the population was decimated. But what really happened during the last genocide of the 20th century? 20 years after the event, France 24 looks back on the origins and circumstances of the massacre.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.